Hello and welcome to National Park Wild. I'm Eric, and I've been to 61 of the US 63 national parks. However, there are national parks outside of the US I've been to that rival some of the very best in the country. I've been to Banff and Jasper in Canada, those are really amazing. However, there is one I recently went to that might be the absolute king of all national parks. This is Galapagos National Park in Ecuador. It was an unbelievable time I got to spend here. It was a bit longer than a week, and the wildlife and scenery of the Galapagos is unbelievable. The activities you can do are fantastic, and it's one of the most amazing places in the world. Is it the best national park? Let's find out. But before we get into what I did on this trip, subscribe to the channel for more content on national parks. So I'm going to basically go through the itinerary that I did and talk about some highlights. It was a really amazing trip, and I'll talk about things that really stood out and make Galapagos a great place. Let's begin with the first day we arrived at the islands. I went with my family, and the first day you fly to Baltra. Baltra is one of the Galapagos Islands, and it has an airport. And just off the airport, you got a bunch of iguanas. Right the moment you get off the plane, you're seeing a bunch of those. And as you take a bus to get to the boat, which will be transporting you to all the different islands, there are different types of cruises you can take in the Galapagos. And ours, as you get to the dock, we saw tons of crabs, sea lions, frigate birds, and pelicans. And this was all just right away. This is before we've done anything on any island, so that was a really amazing start. This already had me pumped for what was to come. The day started with North Seymour Island. This one has a lot of sea lions, like tons, many babies, and watching the waves crash here is really cool. We saw plenty of iguanas, some reef fish while we were on a smaller boat, frigate birds and pelicans are there. The highlight though is the sea lions. Seeing the babies is just adorable, and it is a really fantastic place. We got to walk around a bit, and we were there basically up till sunset. And that was a really awesome time to be there because that's when tons of sea lions come out of the water and they're everywhere. We saw babies and mothers together. It was just really cute, and I love seeing this. This was the first day of the trip, and it was far, far from the best. That should be enough to tell you how amazing the Galapagos is. The second day began in South Plaza. This one, we did a longer type walk. It wasn't super challenging, but we saw plenty of sea lions on the shore. At a certain point, you get to a bunch of sea cliffs. You look over those. We saw a turtle, which was very cool. There are many iguanas and lava lizards on the trail. Certainly a nice sight. Plenty of seabirds all around. The sea lions were definitely the best part of this trail, though. I really enjoyed seeing many of those on this trip. It was fantastic. I enjoyed this hike a lot. We went to the bachelor colony of sea lions, where all the males just go to hang out. And I definitely thought this was a fun trail. Later that day, we didn't do a whole lot. There was a short kayaking, which was fun. And we saw a few sea lions and some sea turtles. But it was one of the more sparse areas in terms of wildlife. But we were along sea cliffs, which was very awesome. And that was just kind of the final thing we did there. There was a shorter walk later that day, but we didn't see a whole lot on that one. There were some sea lions, and perhaps the most interesting sighting was rats on the island. We did not expect to see that, but there were rats. There were more iguanas, and I found that sea lions and iguanas were pretty much the two most popular creatures we found in terms of land and sea. There were more birds, but sea lions and iguanas are really everywhere in the Galapagos. So this day at South Plaza and Santa Fe Island was very nice. The next day was San Cristobal. San Cristobal began with a hike that's a bit more challenging because there's a bit of loose rock and some steep parts. But once you get into the very deep parts of this island, it's quite mountainous, which is a very interesting sight. It was a change of scenery from the more coastal areas we saw on the other days. I really loved that. You are at points just surrounded by the mountains, you can't even see the water. And on this trail, we saw many birds, including boobies. Despite the funny name, they're just really cool birds. There are 3 types: blue-footed, red-footed, and Nazca. All of them look very different. And at one point on the trail, we saw a mother and her young chick. And the chicks are adorable. They look like little puffballs with beady eyes and nice gray beaks. That was possibly cuter than the baby sea lions. Just a really awesome sighting there. I absolutely loved this trail. We saw many birds, and we even saw goats, which is obviously a non-native species that was brought there, but we saw them climbing a mountain, and it was a really interesting sight. The mountain scenery was quite a standout here, but from the same island after the hike, we got to do some beach snorkeling. And during this snorkeling, we saw quite a few interesting animals. We saw turtles, stingrays, parrotfish, and a 5-foot-long reef shark. This animal we did not see for very long, but it was there, and honestly, it was quite a frightening sight as it got somewhat close to us. But I did really enjoy that, and one of the best parts was a playful sea lion in the water. The sea lions really like to play with the humans, swim right up to them and then dive away at the last second or turn at the last second. And it's quite an exhilarating and fun experience. That was a really cool sea lion sighting, but they only got better after that. Because later that day, we did deep water snorkeling. Here, there were many sea lions that did quite a bit of awesome playing. We also saw more turtles, and there were plenty of colorful reef fish all around. I think the highlight, though, was getting to swim with the sea lions. It's just a really unforgettable experience. And I really love snorkeling. I would say Galapagos, just based on that first day, was some of the best snorkeling ever. And I have experienced some great snorkeling in Florida, the Caribbean, and even the Great Barrier Reef. Galapagos rivals the vast majority of those. Was it the best? I'll get to that later. The next day was a really fun day. One of my favorites for sure. First off, there was a walk and a bit of a Zodiac ride is what they are called. These are these small boats that can travel around smaller areas that large boats can't get into. They're more for the touring aspect. We saw sea lions and iguanas, and there were large piles of iguanas known as a mess. The marine iguanas will just get into a pile of possibly hundreds at times and spit at each other because they're trying to get salt out of their mouths, and it's a very interesting sight. And we did a little bit of snorkeling and saw turtles and stingrays, some very close to the shore. And that was a very fun snorkel. And later we kayaked in the same lagoon. And this time we got to go a bit further out, and this time we saw dozens of turtles. I love the sea turtles, and I'd never seen more than I did here. And I've been to some really great places to find them. But following that was deepwater snorkeling at Champion Island. This was, without a doubt, my favorite snorkeling experience of the trip. The number of sea lions is staggering here. You will play with them, you will get close to them. They are not harmful, they're very playful. It was such an incredible, unbelievable experience. There were also plenty of reef fish, and there are some other cool animals to see, but the highlight, without a doubt, is the sea lions. They are the stars. And it simply was fantastic. And that night, we circled around this place called Kicker Rock. This large, interesting rock formation that looks a bit like a shoe from certain angles, with a large spike behind it. It's a really interesting feature as it's just jutting out of the water, and it's pretty otherworldly. And that was one of the first things that made me realize that Galapagos has incredible landscapes to match the wildlife. This was just a really awesome day. We did another long walk that same day. It wasn't the longest or hardest, and in terms of animals, it was fairly familiar stuff. We saw more sea lions, and there was not a whole lot going on until we got to a pond with flamingos in it. And after that, we went to this one point where you can see the ocean. Not a whole lot to it until you see sharks, sea lions, and turtles, and stingrays all swimming around. and we were just on the shore watching this. Unbelievable. This hike seemed very modest at first, but ended up being a really beautiful one in terms of both wildlife and scenery. And the following day, we went to Isabella Island. Isabella is the place to find Galapagos penguins. We found them, and that was the animal I was most excited to see. We saw quite a few swimming, a few standing on rocks, and this was in the morning as we were going toward a mangrove area. In the mangroves, we got to get incredibly close to sea turtles because the water was shallow and they were all right there. There were also some stingrays and iguanas swimming around, but the highlight for me was seeing penguins. There are also flightless cormorants here. A very interesting bird, as where I live in Florida, cormorants are everywhere. But here they're special as they are quite different in both appearance and just how they act. They stand on rocks and swim around, but they don't fly. This is due to their adaptations over many, many years. And it's cool to see how that can change such a common bird in one area to a very unique one in another. But later at Isabella, we did more snorkeling at Punta Moreno. This was a nice snorkel as well. We did see sea lions again, and plenty of other reef fish, and I never got old of snorkeling. It was just really awesome. And I still enjoyed seeing turtles and getting close to so many cool animals. I definitely really loved snorkeling in the Galapagos every time. And at this point I realized only the Great Barrier Reef is possibly better than Galapagos. I think Great Barrier Reef is more diverse and definitely colorful because there aren't really a whole lot of reefs in the Galapagos. But I do find that the wildlife in Galapagos might rival it because swimming with the sea lions is honestly more special than any swimming I've done with other animals in the Great Barrier Reef. It's pretty neck and neck, but I think Great Barrier Reef might be a bit better overall. But I'll talk a little more about it later. Following this, we did a walk on volcanic rock. This was quite an interesting thing. We saw many pools and lagoons that were formed as lava flowed over the land. Essentially, walking on what was once a volcanic eruption is really cool. And we saw pufferfish looking down at a lagoon. That was a really cool thing to look down to. And I just thought this was a really awesome hike. Incredible scenery all around, just looking toward massive mountains because Isabella is the largest island. It has plenty of mountains on it. This was possibly the most scenic day of the trip. And later we boated around and found more penguins. Always great. And we saw dolphins swimming around as well. There were 200 iguanas piled on each other in one area, and there was just a whole lot going on. I really enjoyed this day. Definitely one of my favorite parts of the trip, honestly. And that really proved that Galapagos was one of the best parks. Because I had, at this point, seen sea lions, all sorts of marine mammals, fish of all sorts, turtles, many seabirds of many different types, penguins. And it's just so diverse and incredible. Some of the best wildlife in the world. The next day was a day on Santa Cruz Island, where the primary thing we did was hiking to see Galapagos tortoises. These are very fascinating animals, as they have super long necks, are massive in size, just really cool tortoises. Compared to the turtles, they just seem gigantic. And there were hundreds where we went. This was a really awesome part of the trip, and I thought it was a really great addition because I like seeing these tortoises. And the final full day of the trip, Espanola Island. This one was seemingly going to be less eventful and less fun than other days, but it ended up being one of my absolute favorite parts of the trip. Because, first of all, we did some snorkeling, saw stingrays as we swam around a rock. We also saw some sharks, turtles, and sea lions. Some sea lions seemed a little more aggressive as they were on the beach and territorial, but nobody was harmed and it was very fun. And we really enjoyed this part of the snorkeling. And afterwards, as we thought we were going to be heading to our main boat again, we started heading the opposite direction and found a pod of dolphins was there. I have a GoPro that can go underwater, and I was able to get footage of the dolphins underwater. That was unbelievable to me. I wasn't in the water with them, but man, it was amazing. That was just fantastic. one of my favorite parts of the whole trip. Hundreds of dolphins everywhere, some on film, really awesome. And that was not all for the day, because after that, we did a hike. This hike went to a place full of albatrosses. The albatrosses are huge birds with really interesting defining features. They're really cool to look at. I really enjoyed this. We watched them flying, some walking, saw babies, went to sea cliffs with blowholes, which is where water just comes out, blasting out after rocks hit contact, and it was amazing. Seeing the sea cliffs and so many waves crashing, a sea lion down in a little lagoon, some turtles, plenty of other boobies and other seabirds. And then we saw an albatross courtship dance. A very interesting thing where albatrosses do crazy head movements, hit each other's beaks a bunch of times as if they're sword fighting, make funny noises, and it was just unexpected. We did not think we were going to see that. Saw dozens of iguanas, plenty of sea lions, some moving at speeds that were just unbelievable in the water. Plenty of babies, and this was a really awesome way to end the trip. However, it was not quite over, as the next morning before we left, I found manta rays jumping out of the water. So, that was the end of Galapagos. Without a doubt, one of my favorite national parks ever, as Galapagos National Park is a national park of Ecuador. Is it the best? Better than Yellowstone, my favorite, or better than the top Alaska parks? I would say it's better than the Alaska parks. However, does it beat the King Yellowstone? I'm not quite sure, but I lean toward no. It is very exotic, seeing so many animals. The wildlife here, honestly, I think it does beat Yellowstone. That is hard for me to say, but I just was so engrossed in getting to snorkel with these animals. It was unbelievable. However, Yellowstone does edge out in two things. First of all, it has better scenery. More of the mountains, the geysers. I think it is a nicer park in terms of scenery. It's tough as both are beautiful, but I do think Yellowstone does have better landscapes. I also like that Yellowstone does have more activities that you can do. You definitely can't snorkel in Yellowstone, but the hiking and being able to drive through Yellowstone does give it a more interesting experience overall, as you can really choose where you go and all. Whereas you have to kind of do a schedule thing with Galapagos normally. It's really tough, but honestly, I feel Galapagos and Yellowstone are just about as equally exotic from where I live, because while Galapagos has some familiar animals like some of the birds and the tortoises, no, I just don't think it's really anything like Florida, because the scenery is nothing like it. The reef fish are drastically different. It looks very different, and most of the animals that I do see in Florida that I see there, I see very infrequently. Yellowstone, nothing I see there is anything like Florida, but it's also not quite as out there as some of the things in Galapagos, like seeing penguins in the wild. Yellowstone is still my favorite national park, but Galapagos was unbelievable and will always hold a place in my heart. And I think it is one of the most amazing places I've ever been to in the world. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please stay tuned for more national park content. I will see you next time.